Good evening, Bahamas. Coming up tonight.
Officials at the Ministry of Work signed those contracts to begin the cleanup process in shanty towns in ABACO.
The BPSU president responds to that lump sum payment for workers affected by Hurricane Dorian.
Our News is brought to you by Alive.
Welcome to Our News and thanks for joining us. I'm Kyle Joachim. Top of news tonight, Prime Minister Dr. Hubert Minnis today urging world leaders to treat climate change as the greatest crisis facing the world and to do more to address it. While contributing to the 74th session of the United Nations General Assembly in New York, Minnis mentioned the devastation left behind by Hurricane Dorian and the threats the effects of climate change can have on small countries like the Bahamas.
The small island countries in the Caribbean, in the Atlantic, in the Pacific, and in the Indian Ocean, and around the world are on the front lines of being swallowed into an abyss created initially by human activity and increasingly by inaction.
3 weeks after Hurricane Dorian ravaged portions of ABACO and Grand Bahama, Prime Minister Dr. Hubert Minnis warning of the dire need for the world to seriously consider the dangerous consequences many in the Caribbean will face if this trend of global warming continues.
I add my urgent plea to the cries and voices of many other leaders and citizens of the global commons, urging the nations of the world here assembled to treat the global climate emergency as the greatest challenge facing humanity.
Portions of Marsh Harbor, ABACO were wiped out by strong storm surges, and it was the same in East Grand Bahama. The Prime Minister expressing his full support for the financing of sustainable development projects and changes worldwide.
We urge the implementation of the Samora Path and enhanced financing for sustainable development. We support the Coalition for Disaster Resilient Infrastructure promoted by the Government of India, which I also thank for its recent assistance.
And Minnis, despite the death toll standing at 56, painted the grim picture that there may be many more who died during the storm.
There are officially 56 lives lost, but we know that there are considerably more lives lost because there are 600 missing, because the rising, then receding ocean water swept away young and old from their homes.
And his sentiments were shared by Barbados Prime Minister MOTTLEY, who has been a voice for the Caribbean in the fight against climate change.
We don't come here as a proud people asking for handouts. We don't want and will not be mendicant. What we want, no, what we need is fiscal and policy space. Fiscal and policy space to achieve sustainable development, to be nimble, to adapt, and to innovate in ways that allow us to be true and faithful to the task of bringing prosperity to our people.
But MOTTLEY went deeper, charging world leaders to turn its focus on global warming.
I asked them, do you not see what is happening? And why are you not acting? Do you not care? We are told, and I believe the science, that we are the last generation that can deal with this existential threat.
Minnis also thanked foreign partners like the U.S. Coast Guard for helping during and immediately after the storm, but stressed that while ABACO and Grand Bahama were damaged, the Bahamas' tourism product is still open and available for business.
The Bahamas is a testament to the ability of SIDS to manage debt despite such external setbacks. Mr. President, may I make this invitation and request to potential travelers from throughout the world. Please come and visit one or more of the 14 other major islands in the Bahamas not affected by Hurricane Dorian, including Nassau and the island of New Providence.
Well, the wheels are in motion to begin the cleanup of shanty towns in Abaco following Hurricane Dorian, as 4 companies signed contracts today to begin that process. Georgia Bain reports.
Now, while contracts were signed to begin those cleanup efforts in shanty towns in Abaco, officials were not prepared to say how much those contracts were valued at, but they did say that they're hoping to have the process complete within 3 months. 4 companies signed contracts to begin the cleanup of shanty towns in Abaco following the devastation left behind by Hurricane Dorian. Big Cat Equipment, J&J Pavers, Bill Simmons Construction and Heavy Equipment, and Caribbean Pavement. Officials were asked the value of those contracts, but according to Minister of Works Desmond Bannister, these contracts are based on rates. When asked what those rates are, the minister explained that it depends on the number of hours, the machinery used, and the work completed. According to Bannister, inspectors will be placed on the site to monitor that the work is being done in the times given by the companies. Bannister added that revealing the rates would affect the bidding process of future projects because companies would now know their acceptable rates. However, he promised transparency.
We have to be transparent and provide reports on all of these entities, water and sewage, BPL, all of these. Right now, water and sewage is going to be preliminarily anywhere in Abaco from $15 to $20 million. BPL in Abaco anywhere from $80 to $90 million. And they still don't know everything.
The government will also be providing those funds needed by Water and Sewage and Bahamas Power and Light to begin the restoration process in Abaco, which he estimated to be over $100 million. According to Bannister, no funds will be spared in the rebuilding process. But how long will the cleanup effort take? Director of Works Melanie Roach is hoping for a tight 3-month deadline.
Maximum of 3 months to complete their works. We will, of course, have to reevaluate that based on what they find when they get on the ground, because this is not a matter of just going in and shoveling. Everything has to be done very systematically, very carefully. So they have a maximum of 3 months to complete, and then as we progress, we will determine whether it needs to be extended.
Cost?
The cost depends on it, as the minister said, it's a unit rate. So we have a unit rate for equipment and labor and any materials that are required.
So once the areas are cleaned and paved, what is the future for these former shanty towns?
When these shanty towns are cleared, there's nobody moving back in them. There's an order out that the Ministry of the Environment has prepared an order. It says that nobody is going to move there for residential purposes. Nobody's going to move there for business purposes. The signs are going to be put up by this ministry, and nobody's going to move in. Nobody.
Minister of Works Desmond Bannister was also asked about the cry of residents that the government's presence is not being felt on the affected islands. He said right now the government is stretched thin.
Many of the people who are working, who are trying to make a difference in these communities, have also lost their homes. And also have had to find places for their families and other things, and government is cognizant of that. So the answer is that every day we try to do better and we try to make a difference, and it is going to come together eventually.
Reporting for our News, I'm Giorgio Bain.
Well, Ministry of Works Director Melanie Roach also providing an update on assessments being carried out in Abaco and Grand Bahama following Hurricane Dorian. According to Roach, so far 446 residential assessments have been completed in Spring City and Central Pines, Abaco.
We found that 22% of the buildings are non-salvageable or destroyed. 29% have major damage, 19% have medium damage, and 29% have minimal damage. With regards to the government buildings, to date, yesterday we had a team of 9 persons in Abaco for the day, and they have scoped the repairs for the high school and the primary school in Marsh Harbor, Abaco.
Roach says all major roadways have been cleared and a temporary causeway has been constructed to provide access to Little Abaco. Next week, teams will assess the government complex and schools in South Abaco. In Grand Bahama, teams have completed assessments in East and West End.
In Grand Bahama, so far we've done 1,143 residential assessments, 71 commercial building assessments, 12 mixed-use assessments, and 51 government building assessments. Those assessment teams in Grand Bahama comprise of 6 technical officers who are permanently stationed in Grand Bahama and 6 officers that we send to Grand Bahama on a weekly rotating basis.
According to Roach, assessments are set to continue for another 2 weeks.
What they've found so far is that in Grand Bahama, 16% of the buildings that have been assessed are not salvageable or have been completely destroyed. Another 16% have had major damage, 18% have medium damage, and 50% have minimal damage. They've completed all of the residential assessments in East End, the majority of West End, and then they've done some assessments within the city of Freeport itself.
Day 2 of the trial of former Cabinet Minister Shane Gibson continuing today with the prosecution digging into key witnesses. Jasmine Brown was in court and has the story.
Gibson and his legal team were back in court as 3 witnesses took the stand. Gibson faces 15 counts of bribery concerning his alleged conduct from mid-January 2017 to the end of March 2017. According to the indictment, Gibson asked for $330,000 and received $280,000 in bribes from contractor Jonathan Ash during the charge period. The case revolves around contractor Ash, who prosecutors say was owed upwards of $1 million by the government for work done as part of the cleanup following Hurricane Matthew in 2016. Ash allegedly paid Gibson bribes to speed up the payment process. One of those witnesses was current permanent secretary in the recently created Ministry of Disaster Preparedness, Management and Reconstruction, Jack Thompson. Thompson testified about the time he served as director of the National Recovery and Reconstruction Unit following the destruction caused by Hurricane Matthew in October 2016. According to Thompson, NRRU was set up shortly after Hurricane Matthew to assist the National Emergency Management Agency to provide assistance and help with coordination. Thompson testified that the unit was based in the Penn Building Square on Tonic Williams Darling Highway. Thompson said Gibson was the minister in charge of that unit, which, in addition to coordinating, oversaw payouts to contractors carrying out cleanup work with checks from the public treasury. However, he said there were issues early with the system, which he described as outrageous because of the lack of checks and balances in place. Thompson said he and Gibson were very concerned about the outrageous billing system and held 3 meetings on October 16th, November 16th, and another in late November. Thompson said at those meetings it was made clear that there needed to be a contract system put in place to ensure contractors were not submitting bills for work they did not do. Thompson said he personally raised red flags about the system that saw bills fly in from everywhere by asking the financial secretary to assign an accountant to the unit. He said Gibson was also concerned and issued a stop order for post-hurricane work in November 2016 until the system was set up. In addition to a more structured system, Thompson says it was decided that Deborah Bastian would assist in their efforts to make it more organized. Thompson said Bastian's role was to streamline the process because she had experience with the public treasury. He says she also vetted the bills submitted by contractors. While being questioned by the Crown, Thompson said there were 3 contractors awarded work in the Centerville area, and Ash was not one of them. He also testified about a spreadsheet dated from October 2016 to May 2017 he had created of the money paid out for post-Matthew work that totaled more than $23 million. Thompson said $8.7 million of the $23 million was paid out to contractors doing cleanup. Thompson said Ash was paid $7.5 million. When asked by the jury why Ash was paid if he was not a contractor on the list, Thompson said he believed Ash submitted a bill before the contract system was implemented. Also taking the stand was Sergeant Dale Strawn, who testified about calls made from phones registered to Ash, Gibson, and Bastian. Strawn testified that between January to April 2017, there were 130 calls from Gibson's phone to Bastian's phone and 126 calls made from Bastian's phone to Gibson's phone. The case continues before Justice Carolita Bethel on Monday morning. Reporting for our News, I'm Jasmine Brown.
Well, Cabinet has approved a lump sum payment of $1,000 for all public servants affected by Hurricane Dorian. But while Bahamas Public Service Union President Kingsley Ferguson applauds the move, he said something should be done for workers who experience flooding in the capital and those going through a rough time financially. Julian Gray reports.
The union president said not only is his members being affected by a natural disaster, but in his estimation, many of them have suffered an economic devastation. And he says the government must pay up for both.
I don't know if they could hurt any more than they're hurting. And could I tell you that the Bahamian workers in this country are devastated economically. On their already strained salaries, we have the increase of VAT and the cost of living. And neither the increase of VAT and the cost of living, their salaries, it's impossible for their salaries to keep pace with what is going on. And so people, because they're challenged, they're dying simply because they can't afford to live.
A memorandum sent from the Ministry of Public Service and National Insurance noted that Cabinet has approved a $1,000 lump sum payment and a $2,600 relocation payment for public servants in Abaco and Grand Bahama who were affected by Hurricane Dorian. A hardship allowance will also be given on a case-by-case basis.
While persons sympathize with the persons that were evacuated and displaced from Abaco and Grand Bahama, they find themselves in a position where before the hurricane, persons were economically challenged. And we cannot insist that persons construct their lives and continue living with building bricks without straw. And so a number of persons are excited that their colleagues are being assisted, but they're asking the question, what about us?
Ferguson said the government is not acting in a labor-friendly manner or with any regard for the union. Ferguson said the union understands that the country is facing a natural disaster and applauds the payment to those affected by the storm. However, he said workers in New Providence also need compensation.
My recommendation to the minister at that particular point was that there would be some sort of assistance, be it via loan of some $5,000, that these people can access to assist with the replacement of their sheetrock, the replacement of their furnitures. A number of persons would have totally lost all their furnitures. And so that was our recommendation.
Just weeks before Hurricane Dorian hit, the BPSU took to the streets demanding they be paid a lump sum payment, which was outlined in their industrial agreement. The government agreed. However, after the passage of that deadly storm, that payment, according to the Deputy Prime Minister, will be delayed. Ferguson said the union is trying to act responsibly and be sympathetic, but said the time for the government to respond has long passed and unrest is brewing.
Based on the responses that we've been getting, it may very well escalate to that. It may very well escalate to that, because if you don't see the need to contact me via phone or to say to me, give us until next week, then you're asking for a fight.
Reporting for our News, I'm Jillian Gray.
All right, thanks, Jillian. Still to come, a 17-year-old Dorian survivor tells her story. Plus, an anonymous donor gives to the Ministry of Health. Find out what after the break.